Hi, let's make a start. Good morning to everybody tuning in. It's great to have you with us and welcome to a special webinar discussing, as the title slide says there, shifting the game, Diarra's impact on football transfers. Absolutely great to have you with us for the next 90 minutes. I'm joined by a host of people that are right at the forefront of what is going on in what is a really potentially interesting and serious moment for the game. So I'd like to welcome this morning, first of all, founder of the Football Transfer Forum, Tony Sharkey. Tony, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, good morning and good afternoon for the guys in Europe. Yeah, it's always great to cooperate with the European Football Agents Association. You know, we've been working together, and I've been learning a lot since hooking up with Robby and the guys. So it's great to have a chance to explore this topic with EFAA. Yeah, I'm all good. Newcastle's, yeah, it's all right. It's cloudy
Yeah.
today, but happy to be on the webinar.
Thanks, Tony. And then Robby, I'm going to hope I'm going to get your surname right here. Robby Houben, Professor of Company Law and Sports Enterprise at the University of Antwerp. Good morning to you. How's Antwerp this morning, and how are you?
I'm doing great. The weather in Antwerp is cloudy, rainy, and cold, so I'm happy to be inside together with you to discuss transfers. Thank you
That's
for the invite.
absolutely perfect. Perfect. Last but absolutely not least, Roberto Carlos Branco Martins, General Counsel at the European Football Agents Association. Good morning, Roberto. How are you? Where in the world are you?
I'm in the office in Haarlem in the Netherlands, so we are all over the place altogether. Thank you very much, Ryan, Tony, and Robby. Great. Looking forward.
Very good. Very good. Okay, I'm going to come back to you first, then, Roberto. Really, just for, I guess, a kind of opening statement on uh, why this case is important, why we're having this webinar, and why really EFA are putting so much effort into it as well.
Well, maybe just to set the scene a little bit. You know that in professional football, we're always struggling in terms of governance and regulation. You know, till what extent do certain topics um, are fit to be regulated by a sports governing body, and where does the other regulator, the government, comes in? And where does the actual ordinary law comes in. So it's already quite interesting to understand that we are operating in that friction, clubs, players, associations. But I think that players, agents, when we look at EFA's perspective, have an even more specific position in there. So if the focus of this talk, or at least the panel, the discussion afterwards, is on what kind of impact does it have on transfers and players agents, I think that it's interesting to look at it from that perspective. From EFA side, we've been very interested first to see the three cases and the judgments of the ECJ last year, 2023, in December, the Royal Antwerp case, the ISU case, and the homegrown, no, the Royal and ISU case, and obviously the Super League case. That's already where we knew that a shift was going on. So the autonomy of the sports governing body was already suffering a bit, in the sense that especially FIFA would need to move more towards really evidence-based policies. Why are we allowed to have an exception from the application of EU law on the basis of sports specificity? How specific is sports, and how does it benefit the consumer? And we know that it's a bit difficult for them to come up with these evidence-based policies, because there's a lot of emotion obviously going on in the world of football. So we see that that was an interesting twilight zone where we would find ourselves. And it leads still nowadays to some unclarity for the near future. In my perspective, Diarra and its outcome, but I won't take away the floor from Robby. But from a perspective of football agents and players, we believe that first Diarra follows more or less the rhetoric of the judges in those three cases I mentioned, a critical vision towards the autonomy of the sports governing bodies, and a bigger necessity for an explanation and a justification why these impediments on various laws that apply to all of us should be allowed. If Diarra, well, not if Diarra has now led to a situation that players and agents need to be taken more seriously. And that's why from EFA side, we believe it's very important to have these kind of discussions. Again, I think if we let Robby take us by the hand and explain about the case and the content, that we can have a discussion afterwards on why we do this and how we see the specific impact. And I would like also to welcome the participants. I think we have an interesting group together, a mixture of agents, lawyers, tax advisors, if I'm correct. There's also a bit of an interactive session because the first Diarra player still needs to come to the surface, obviously. So we're also in a situation where the whole landscape is going to be really colored in after, I think, the first or during the first transfer window in January. So the timing is really good also of this session. I don't want to take too much time because I think that we're going to discuss afterwards, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, a bit of housekeeping before we pass over to Robby. First of all, we just want to get a bit of a feel of where everybody's tuning in from today. So I'm just going to launch a little poll here. We want to know from what position are you tuning in from today? Are you a lawyer, an agent, investor, club rep? Are you working at FIFA, or are you something else? Whilst you're being,
I'd love to have some FIFA representatives on, but I don't think we have, unfortunately. I'd like to think that we would.
Whilst you're doing that, just a bit of housekeeping. If you've got any questions, we definitely want to get through some questions a little bit later on. Please put that in the Q&A box. That makes my job much easier a little bit later on. Any general comments, or if you want to share your LinkedIn address or anything like that, that'll be the chat box which I've opened up as well. Okay, excellent. We'll end the poll there, and I'll share the results. So, guys, we've got some lawyers, and we've got some agents, and we've got some others. We've got some others, Tony, as well.
Yeah, none from FIFA though. I was hoping we had a few people tuning in from FIFA, but not to worry.
Excellent. Okay, good stuff. Right, lovely. Roberto's teed it up nicely, Robby. I'm going to hand it over to yourself, really, to give us an explanation about this case. So, good morning again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Yeah, Roberto, so the court is really on fire, and it's on a streak of convictions of the status quo. And this has again become very clear in Diarra. So what's it about? Diarra was a player who played for Lokomotiv Moscow. He was still under contract, and he was accused of terminating his contract unilaterally without just cause before the end of the contract. And the club basically claimed 20 million euros, being the amount that they paid for him in a transfer. And Diarra was not in agreement with this amount, so it went to the FIFA tribunals. It took almost a year, and at the end of that year, the claim of 10 million was awarded, and the first claim was also the joint liability that we all know in the FIFA RSTP, but that was dropped in the end by the FIFA Football Tribunal. This is basically the core of the facts, and Diarra claimed afterwards before a Belgian court that because of this system, he was not able to play for almost a year. And as a result, he suffered damages. Why could he not play? Because of these draconian financial sanctions above his head, and also that any new club that would hire him would face sportive sanctions alongside being jointly liable for these financial sanctions. So he said, I was locked up and I couldn't play for almost a year. I suffered damages. In that court case, the court was at the level of appeal invited to launch questions to the Luxembourg Court of Justice, which it did. And we have now come to a verdict on the 4th of October. And basically the court declared, I think, the backbone of the transfer system invalid. Because what it said was that the financial and sportive sanctions that the player faces who terminates unilaterally without just cause are not proportionate. That the joint liability of the engaging club alongside the sporting sanctions that engaging club can face is also not proportionate. And the fact that no ITC is delivered in event of a dispute on the termination, again, not proportionate. And the court comes to this conclusion against the background of two important articles of the Treaty on the Function of the European Union, being the one on free movement of workers and on fair competition. And it basically says that these three rules taken together impede free movement of workers because, again, they are not proportionate. And it also says it leads to unfair competition on the market for players because the rules have, and this is important from a legal perspective, as their object, the limitation of free competition between clubs on the player market. And because of this by object qualification that the court gives here, in fact, there is no chance anymore to save these rules. Because in event of such a by object qualification under European competition law, you can only escape or justify your rules in view of economic efficiency. So economic efficiency, not sporting integrity and so on, economic efficiency. And this is, in all honesty, impossible in this context. So the rules are invalid and dead in the water. What does this mean for the transfer system? Well, in the European Union, these invalidated rules do not longer apply. A very important question, and Roberto already alluded to it, is as of when? Because I heard some lawyers already say that not to worry, because the Court of Appeal in Mons, Belgian Court of Appeal, still has to rule in the case of Diarra, and that will be only next year. This is true, but also does not impede the immediate effect of the ruling. So as of 4 October, these rules that I've just referred to are considered no longer valid within the EU. So the relevance is already now, and the new now is the next mercato in the winter.
Robby, is that it for the whole the case now? It's sort of settled. Is there an appeals process? Is there a process?
No.
Has there been any compensation being granted to Diarra?
Well, that is subject to the Belgian case. So the court in Belgium still has to apply what it has now learned from the Court of Justice to the specific case of Diarra. So this is what is not yet settled. But that the rules are invalid is clear as of 4 October for the whole of the Union. But the very concrete application to the damages claimed by Diarra, that is still open.
And what sort of level are those damages going to be at, do you think?
I think he claimed 4 to 6 million, but I don't know by heart.
Wow. So the actual case was about 10 million that the clubs were wanting to claw back, and he's now going to get 4 to 6 million on the time he was not employed. How long was he not employed as a footballer then?
I think it was a little bit less than a year. And he got then a contract offer by Charleroi,
yeah,
which was subject to the joint liability being dropped, which became reality at the end of the FIFA tribunal at the time of the verdict. But at that moment, when the liability was dropped, then he went to Marseille instead of Charleroi. But okay, it still has to be applied to Diarra, but it is relevant already now. and the word mercato has been dropped. The court in its verdict actually gave its endorsement for the concept of a mercato because it is in support of competition integrity. So that is still very much a reality. The concept of the mercato, both summer and winter. Well, I also saw that FIFA announcement saying, not to worry, just a technicality. We will work it out. We will work it out, and then they launched the LinkedIn or whatever appeal for everyone to come up with a solution. A little bit of nuance here. Yes, it's true that only a couple of rules have been declared invalid, but in all honesty, I think they're so important for the existing transfer system that you could say that the system has been hit in the heart. So what is then the relevant framework going forward? Well, the relevant framework is national labor laws, which is a patchwork because in each jurisdiction, these labor laws are different. For instance, in Belgium, we have a very famous law of 78 allowing a sports player to terminate at residual value of the contract, which is in all cases a lot less than any transfer sums in the past. So, and this is, I think, a common thread. When you look at these national labor laws, it will be much cheaper to terminate a contract while it is still ongoing than before. And this will also probably have an impact on transfers and transfer sums.
Roberto, in terms of that, in terms of transfer values, what's your thoughts on, Diarra? Is that going to mean that we don't see big heavy transfers, or how's that going to unpack?
I think it will have a definite will have an impact, on those transfer values if all parties are not involved in creating that specific value. Because what happens now is that the value of a contract cannot be connected directly to what the question is that the club has, what the request is that the club has as regards the market. If clubs want 40 million, but they can't have a justification for such an amount of 40 million, and the player enters into a similar situation as Diarra in terms of litigation, and I think that no judge will feel comfortable in applying that 40 million. I don't know how you look at it, Robby, in the sense of what kind of discretionary powers a judge will have, but I can't imagine that he would go for the football kind of value.
No, he will not. From a business perspective, I think it's very clear. When you know that a player can terminate unilaterally at a cost of 2 million, why would you pay 40 million? And this 2 million you can calculate on the basis of the law, because there is a formula in every domestic labor law.
So are we saying, guys, that big money transfers in the European Union have just been, washed away with this one Diarra case, that players who were valued at 25, 30, 50 million, and now we're going to have to mark down as potentially 2 to 5 million or whatever? Is that what we're saying here?
That is how I see it when nothing happens. And I'm going to immediately add to that sentence. I think something should happen, because if nothing happens, it's so disruptive that the whole ecosystem suffers severely. It is disruptive for clubs because, as you are all aware, say for 30, 40 clubs in Europe, all clubs are basically dependent on transfer income to make a profit or just to survive. So if that income dries up, they are in deep trouble. And budgets will be a lot less than they are now. And clubs may also be disincentivized to invest in youth because why would they do it if they can't generate a return on it? Clubs who overspend, sportive reasons in a certain season and count on the transfer system to make it all up will have difficulty. And this is also very important. It's a little bit of a boring argument, but it's an important one. Accounting. Players are valued at a certain value in the books, and you have amortizations, but the drop in value will be higher under a new system, so that you have to take losses, and from an accounting perspective. And this is relevant for all clubs, also the big ones, because of course there is here now a difference between clubs that could potentially benefit from this new now. If you are a big club and you're an end user, save money, but all the rest is in trouble.
Well, you save money going forward, Robby, but when you have to write down, you spent, let's look at a club like Chelsea, spent millions and millions, billions on players who all overnight have a transfer value, and it's all amortized into the long contracts and what have you. For all that to be written down, it's going to be a substantial loss. And I think Roberto, mentioned it, that if the transfer values are washed away overnight, the clock's ticking for January, and we haven't got, on the 1st of January, if a big player moves for a just cause and it costs 2 million to move a big player in Europe, that's going to set the market on fire, isn't it?
Yeah, it takes only one to set it in motion.
Robby, you mentioned there, though, if nothing happens, so is there the potential of something getting in the way to protect the status quo?
Well, I think that doing nothing is not an option because of the disruptiveness. I just want to say one more thing before I answer your question. And that is that the claim was launched by players, but it can also be heavily disruptive for players too. Because I can imagine that when you are a top player, you can get higher wages at top clubs because of this new system. But if you play for a club below the big 5 leagues, not necessarily a top club, that is dependent on transfer income and doesn't get any transfer income anymore, there is less budget also to spend on player wages. And why would a club give long-term contracts to a player who can leave at any time? So that new now can also be disruptive for players. And this is why I think that there should be a sense of urgency everywhere, because clubs are affected, players are affected, and as players are affected, agents are also affected. And this necessitates action, because as referred, one player can set it on fire, and I'm pretty sure that there will be somebody.
Maybe I can add something, guys, before, because we already have a couple of questions. I think they're very comfortable on your shoulders there, Robby. So I will speak a little bit so that you can prepare for the answer.
Where can I find the questions? In the chat? Q&A?
Yes, I think so.
Q&A,
the Q&A,
Robby.
Okay.
Now, what I want to say something, if I'm, is it okay, Ryan, if I just give one thing we should not forget, is that we are here now, speaking about professional sports, professional football, international transfers, the impact it would all have had, all will have on these investments made by the club. But we should not forget that we were all sitting on a ticking time bomb, obviously, because we have this concept of Article 17 and further in the regulation on status and transfer of players, focusing on contractual stability. And I think I've read the text for sure over 1,000 times in my life, and I can't find any connection to contractual stability versus the protection of the player in a certain amount. Contractual stability is basically just based on uncertainty for the player. In the Diarra situation, the stability is purely connected to I'm too afraid to terminate my contract by myself if I don't have a reason, because I have no clue what kind of fine I will get. And moreover, if I move to a new club, that club will be liable to pay that fine, and I'll become a persona non grata in the football world. Well, I was not applauding the contractual stability fundament in that sense, obviously. So it lacks in any case a balance between the various rights of the employers and the workers in this sense. So if you really want to have a fair system, at least provide a voice for the player, and as a consequence the agent will advise the player normally in such a situation, or the club also. But it would be far more logic for FIFA to really take all those organizations on board, and maybe already to provide maybe a topic for discussion later. I know that FIFA now intends to open up this consultation phase, but instead of knocking on the doors of the righteous parties to discuss about these issues, they came up with an internet poll. You just fill in whatever you feel about it.
Yeah.
My goodness, who's going to give a feedback? If 1,000 people that are sports enthusiasts are going to give feedback, is that the same level of appreciation is going to be given to the workers' perspective? So I couldn't really grasp the intention behind that. So sorry, the point I was trying to make is it isn't a big surprise.
Yeah,
this issue.
But Roberto, that consultation call for consultation, it's almost like the horse is bolted and we're trying to shut the stable door. But it's also very much, let's see how we can improve Article 17. And when you and Robby have spoken, it's much wider than that. It's much broader than that. There's so much more ramifications of this one decision than just let's tweak Article 17. I totally take your point about players living in fear. That, I think there was a certain thing with Diarra where he hadn't been paid and he wasn't happy. The payment hadn't come at the right time or something like that as well. So he had a bit of a niggle that he wouldn't have wanted addressing. But the fear of players unilaterally cancelling their contracts, and there could be tens of millions over their heads, keeps them in line, if you like.
Exactly. That's the whole thing. And I think in my perspective, that's the biggest impediment that there exists. I always said this does not infringe the free movement of workers because it happens within the contractual duration of a fixed term contract. So if the contract terminates and then you can move, then you need to respect that contract. If there's no clause stating that you're allowed to terminate the contract, you need to pay damages. But if that amount of damages, so what happens in my perspective is, okay, you terminate the contract, then you are a free agent normally as a worker. But in any other employment legislation, I would say the world, but I'm maybe too enthusiastic about it, at least in European nations, as a general worker, if you terminate your contract, then you're at the end of the contract, you're free. And then you look back to your employer and you think, hey, wait a minute, it's not very nice what I did because I had absolutely no reason to terminate this contract. If I do it immediately now, he didn't even have the chance to think about getting a substitution for me. And I understand that you already made the investments, for my contract till the end of the year. So I get it. I get it that a certain amount of damages needs to be paid. But if I freakingly make 1 million, you're not gonna make me pay 40 million, are you?
Yeah, it's just not proportional. I think that's what the judge said, not proportional at all. 40 million, and who's got 40 million? Let's face it, even well-paid high-level footballers can't just reach into the bank account for these sort of numbers.
Yeah,
let's try and add some depth into this now through some of the questions which I think we're angling into anyway. So I hope, again, apologies on the pronouncance of names, but one for you here, Robby. So a couple of questions from Jeroen. Can a player with an EU nationality but playing at a non-EU club also benefit from this ruling?
It's a very good question. And so in the case of Diarra, it was actually a Russian club.
Yeah.
But the link was that there was an offer by Charleroi, which is an EU-based club. Player had a French nationality. So the court took it on board. That was enough. It will depend, I think, on the circumstances. If you get an offer from an EU club, then you pull in these new rules. But for only having the EU nationality and transferring from a South American club to a Swiss club, I'm not very sure whether that would fly under the new now. It can very well be that the FIFA RSTP is still applicable there, which is of course total nonsense because transfer market is global. So that's also again a reason why we would need to come up with a solution fast that is again workable at the global level. Because there can be, in my view, no difference between a transfer from France to Italy and a transfer from the UK to Switzerland. And you could come up with many examples there. So there should be a solution that is global.
Robby, if I can just cut across you there, we talk, obviously, Jerome has got a player in mind probably that he wants to bring in January. But, you know, with us coming out with, and when I say us, I mean England, the UK, the Premier League and the Championship are really, really strong, powerful marketplaces within UEFA region. And the potential for Premier League clubs to buy European players at discounted rates will only go and strengthen the Premier League's hand. Am I right in thinking that?
That makes sense.
Tony, are you saying the benefits of Brexit are finally materialising?
No, we haven't seen any benefits of Brexit. If this is one of them, then it's a total. And I, you know, we live in a world where people are making rules all the time, and the unintended consequences of those rules, like the Article 17 going down the line, when they are tested, you know, we see all sorts. And you know, Robby's highlighted many areas that this could affect. And there's probably even more that we haven't thought of just yet.
Yeah, definitely. A lot will unfold in the next Mercato. And to give the judges a little bit of credit and again, criticism, they applied the law. And I think they did it correctly, but they did not apply business logic because this verdict has the potential to be very disruptive. But that's, of course, not the job of these judges. But I think FIFA should have been prepared by now. Because this is not a surprise for those people following the verdict. There should have been something by now. And connecting to Roberto, the only solution that is viable going forward is a consulted one. One that is made by way of co-decision, where clubs and players are really at the table and do not have to swallow top down a new system that is perhaps again invalid and that will again be fought in court. So that I think would not be the right course of action to just, hey, we have something new, it might be invalid, but we know only in 3 years' time, so let's continue with what we're doing.
Just Roberto, I'm sort of feeling like, you know, FIFA have made these rules in a room in Switzerland. You know, we know that they haven't consulted very well on the football agent side. We know you as EFA have been, you know, advocating for agents to be at the table, to be recognized as proper stakeholders, to have that consultation that we want. And Robby talked about players being consulted as well as agents. But is this an indication that, you know, FIFA doing the things the way they've been doing has come home to roost?
It's come on to.
Well, like you know, it's backfired on them, their approach to this type of thing, and the lack of consultation. Come home to roost, an English phrase meaning like, what's it mean, Ryan? Just
it's another sort of unfortunate consequence, really. Yeah.
No, I think it is. I think it truly is because the Christmas judgments, let's call them that, the first one, Super League, Royal Antwerp, and ISU, you already saw that situation over there. Basically, a top down, as Robby mentioned it, a top down obligation to implement these rules without any form of proper consultation, or if consultation takes place, just cherry picking, the various elements that fit your own perspective, and then implement it. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I don't want to go into that now, but obviously you are carrying out these activity as a monopolist and not taking the various interests into consideration properly. And it's not only EFA complaining about it. FIFA was complaining about it as well. The EPFL, ECA also complained about it sometimes. The whole discussion now with the FIFA Club World Cup. You see all the other stakeholders now trying to, not trying, they actually complain at the European Commission. So this is not something that is only directed towards the transfer system. I think FIFA now have realized that sometimes they will be slapped on the fingers if they go beyond to what their actual area of regulatory competence is. So I believe that we have this discussion about FIFA opening consultation or whatever. It almost feels to me as a sort of trying to impose the idea that FIFA should organize this. But for me, having a background in labor law, it's totally logic that FIFA shouldn't do this. And I'm not saying it because I dislike FIFA for whatever reason. I'm just saying that you should not regulate an issue that is so clearly connected to employment legislation, employment law, and protection of workers in the hands of a natural monopolist in a specific sector. If I would be FIFA, I wouldn't want to regulate this. I would want to implement this, but I would like to make the fundament in coordination with the relevant stakeholders, and they are available in the European Union. So that's what
I very much agree
perspective.
with what Roberto says. Actually, the task of FIFA here is to be the notary public, to just record what clubs and players and leagues come up with, because they have the skin in the game. And they are the engine of professional football. So especially as regards labor laws, clubs and players are very much in the driver's seat, or should be. And they could, in that capacity, and this could be part of the solution, start up the social dialogue process, wherein UEFA is only an observer and FIFA is not even a member.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of some of the additional unintended consequences here. A lot of those European clubs are operating within the new European FFP model, where there's a cascading down of what they can spend on transfer wages, agents' fees as a percentage of their turnover. We're essentially stripping out a big chunk of their turnover here. Roberto, are you then now starting to worry about the consequence on the sort of downward drive of what players are just going to be able to be paid moving forward?
Well, absolutely not, actually. Because I think that, and then maybe we could start already to think about, okay, how to deal with this in practice. I think that the only way out now, well, let me give you a practical example, if I'm allowed. And Robby, obviously, feel free, if you see some legal implications. Before Diarra, let's put it like that, I would advise a member or a client, an agent, to sit at the table and try to negotiate, a good salary for his player, a good condition, obviously, for himself. But there was a limit to the power that he could bring to the negotiation table, because the club would say, and I would focus on the Netherlands now, said, okay, this is like the crown jewel of the club. We have a contract, it's valid, its duration is 4 years. We want to extend the contract. If the player would put some power and say, I don't want to extend the contract, okay, then you could put some pressure by the club on the player. Okay, I get that. But the player would normally ask, and the agent would normally ask, what is your intention to receive as a fee, as a max fee for this player? And the club would say, well, okay, we believe that we go to the market for 40 million. Let's put it like that. So if you would get more than 40 million, you were able to get a bonus. You get a bonus for that, yeah. Obviously working on the guidelines of the agent regulations. But the club was reluctant to put in a specific clause in that contract because they wanted the total freedom to ask whatever they want. And the player, as mentioned, felt like he was caged, because if he wouldn't agree to what the club wants, he would terminate the contract himself, no just cause. Okay, so obviously we've got a Diarra situation, too afraid to do that. So the club had the player caged on the one hand and had the market totally free. If they would discuss with the agent, we think about getting more or less 40 million for this player. So go to the market and see if you can find a club crazy enough to pay that, and whatever's above the 40 million is for you. Then that was basically what it was. The club could come back, and sometimes the agent says, "Yeah, I found a club for 40 million." Say, "Okay, now we're going to sit around the table, and now we're going to see if we want to sell it for this amount." Because the club obviously could think, if someone pays 40 million, then we will try to get 50 million out of the market because we have some leverage with other clubs. So basically, if you would be advising your player as an agent, it'd be very difficult because the player sometimes has something in his mind, and you have to explain, yeah, the 40 million was not really a clause that if someone would pay it, you would be free to go. It was more a clause to open discussions for the club. And basically, we were doing some marketing for the club because I went to the market with this 40 million and spoke to various clubs. Now everyone thinks that it's 40 million. So it's really easy as a club. And there was no negotiation power of the player and the agent in that sense. Now it's different because if the club does not have that Article 17 protection anymore, apparently. So if the player now moves and goes and terminates his contract without a just cause, and instead of the 40 million, the club runs the risk of getting 2 million. I actually don't think, but I would be keen to hear it from Robby and maybe also some participants in the audience. I don't think first that a judge will go and negotiate towards that 40 million, but I'm also not very keen to find out that the player and his agent, and this is where I think that the true difference lies, that the player and his agent are that crazy to not understand that a bigger amount of a transfer fee for a football club is also valuable for the market. You're not coming up with crazy amounts that have no connection to reality anymore. And maybe we could speak later on a little bit about objective criteria to see what creates the value of such a player. But there will be no agent or player crazy enough not to understand that if you collaborate with a club in almost a sort of a joint venture, to see what's in it for everyone. The player wants to develop his career, wants to get a good salary. And if he is the one, enabling the club to ask for a higher transfer fee because he developed so much, then he should realize that and include the club in his development. The agent should be the one fine-tuning everything and actually between the parties. So now we have this necessity for dual representation. It's a different discussion, but more than ever. Because if you don't have the agent, the player on your side, the player or can simply say, "I'm not going to extend my contract," or the player could say, "Okay, you're such a big mouth club, you think that you're in the driver's seat. We're not going to include a clause as a buyout, no problem, but I will go to court. If I lose, I'll stay. And if I win, then you lose,
Yeah.
So it's quite a fascinating situation. I don't know, Robby, do you share that idea? Do you see some implications from that perspective?
No, I will leave this practical example to you, but I'm going to refer to Ryan's question again. I think there is a regulatory spillover here because, as you said, the squad spend rule is there, and you can spend only 70% of your revenue on players and so on. And if your revenue drops because you don't have transfer income, then this rule doesn't work anymore. So it's not only Article 17 of the RSTP, but you need to look from a holistic perspective to everything and see what the impact is. Because if you apply this squad spend rule in the new now, then there is, for some clubs, not a lot of budget to spend on players.
Yeah, totally. Let's just get into a couple more questions from the audience. Audrey put 2 questions. Audrey, I think Roberto just articulated the answer to your first one. But Audrey asks, what about training compensation when signing a first professional contract? Could this also be seen as limiting the free movement of workers within the EU? Roberto?
Well, that's an interesting point because And people tend to forget that. And I think that's quite funny because it seems like there's almost a selective memory in specific interest groups and stakeholders in football. Back in 2001, and I'm starting to realize that it seems like the ice age for many people. Well, back in 2001, when the European Commission basically did like this and said, "Okay, FIFA, we agree to a transfer system, and we will see if will be workable in the future." It's really interesting to go into that 2001 agreement because then you really see the fundamentals from the European Commission and why they agreed to go on with it. In that transfer system, there was already this mentioning of, okay, if the transfer system after Bosman is now killed, we do need to get some money in for the compensation training of the players. That's why we introduced training compensation solidarity mechanism. It is there. It is already there. So Ryan, are you going to tell me that Ajax, if they are educating a player and training a player for 1 year and they get 90,000 euros, 90,000, well, I think they eat really well and they got a lot of various data issues and they have this big Adidas inflatable, in the pitch.
Yeah.
I think for 90K per annum per player, it's quite a big amount already if he transfers, right? So
Yep.
that's an interesting one, and it's already there. And I think that it would even be difficult for clubs in the highest category to prove that you really need these 90K per annum.
Yep.
So I would say that that is something that would not limit the free movement because it's something that was really accepted as a base for training compensation. Obviously, we have situations where players are stuck between a rock and a hard place because of training compensation that still needs to be paid. But in general, in my view, those sums are more realistic than the higher transfer fees, and they could more easily profit from an exemption on the basis of EU law. But I don't know how Robby looks at that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree because you can justify rules that have an anti-competitive effect or that impede free movement if they are directed towards a legitimate aim and are proportionate. And one of the legitimate aims is training of youth.
Yeah.
So, and the system in itself seems proportionate. So I would not fear this system to be declared invalid anytime soon because I think it's again it's proportionate.
But it's another example of when a player could potentially be trapped and his employment prospects are reduced. He might have to go to a club where there's no training compensation, which might harm his career. I think it's a great question. It's another example where players are sort of caught up in the training compensation or the just cause or whatever it is, or even where a club asks for a really large transfer fee and the player, nobody comes up with that money. He has to stay at that club. So these are all examples of where players are sort of trapped by the legislation, by what's in FIFA's articles, and maybe they're all up for challenge.
Yeah, basically all rules that come from a private regulator that impede free movement or fair competition, and this applies to almost every rule from a private regulator, can go to court, basically. So the whole issue is it a proportionate rule? Because with every rule, you kind of restrict free movement. As FIFA or UEFA or FA.
So we've got, what is it now? We're just at the start of November. The January transfer window is literally 7 or 8 weeks away. Is there some advice and guidance, Roberto, that you can give to agents regarding this impact of Diarra?
Yes, obviously we give some advice. We advise to be more critical when moving towards a negotiation table. If I see now sometimes players extending their contracts, I saw one yesterday that I believed, oh my goodness, I hope that you were aware what you were doing, because I think there should be no contracts anymore that would not include a buyout clause if the club really wants to have an amount as a return. And that's where an interesting thing comes up. And I think again, Robby is more from the business perspective. I believe that a club or a sporting director, when negotiating a contract with an agent and his player, if he or she acts as if, we're still untouchable, we still can decide whatever we want, I think that's a very bad business decision, because you have no clue the amounts of money that are going to come in. I could not, a partner here at the firm, I couldn't justify these kind of decisions. So I see a big change there. And I already noticed what's going on with clubs. Some clubs are still trying to say, we don't know what really is going to happen with Diarra, because there's no player yet that has used this. So it probably will stay the same, and FIFA will come up with a new rule. We can't kill these fees. But that's absolutely silly, because if you're saying that towards someone that's sitting at the opposite side of the table, who should actually be the one negotiating with you a fundamental change of rules. It's still silly that in many heads of sporting directors there is the idea that FIFA will come up with something else. FIFA has been shot 4 times. No, not 4 times, because not 4 times it was FIFA, but the sports governing bodies have been shot 4 times on the basis of going beyond what they could regulate within their own autonomy. So this is really, in my perspective, the end of the bargaining power of clubs. It really goes back now to a more level playing field.
Yeah, so Roberto, the situation in Spain, where everything's in the contract, or many, we've seen buyout clauses coming into other countries, but I think am I right in saying that it originated in Spain, where most of the anything to do with buyout or breaking contracts was all in the player's contract? Is that what you're saying, that everybody should be doing that for every single contract?
Well, the Spanish situation, what I always, Spanish and Portuguese clubs basically, when they said, don't worry, this is just marketing, because no one will pay 200 million for an 18-year-old player. Obviously, it's just marketing, and we need to include this clause in the contract. That already was a source for negotiation for either a higher salary or either a bigger participation of the player, and as a consequence, then via the player, the agent sometimes, or via the club. So that's already something that you bring to the table. So other countries now have I think that would also be implemented, but I'm not sure. Robby, how do you look at it from a Belgian perspective, if I may ask?
Well, from a couple of conversations that I had with people that own clubs here in Belgium, the rise of the buyout clause is very much true. So this is on the agenda, and in the minds of or as a potential solution, a potential contractual solution. But again, this will not lead to the transfer system and the amounts that went on to be reinstated. The market will be different, and these amounts need to be more proportionate, and that is the whole difficulty. What is it? What is proportionate?
Yeah.
How do you calculate this? That is the magic potion, this formula. If you can come up with this formula and everybody supports, and with everybody, I mean players, clubs, for most agents, yeah, then we can continue.
And do you think the contracts are likely to get shorter, guys? Because if you haven't got that certainty, and the reason for signing a long contract, obviously it helps with amortization and what have you, but signing a long contract makes sure that you've got transfer rights and the player's not going to go free, and you can maybe sell him in 2 or 3 years' time. Do you think that's going to shorten contracts and deals?
For me, I think it's a possibility. Why give long-term contracts when a player can leave any time at almost nothing, so to say? But as a counter argument, if you would give a player a longer term contract, the severance pay he would have to pay when he leaves early will be a lot higher. So that could disincentivize the player to terminate too early. So actually, this is a long answer for saying I don't know.
Roberto, question here, an anonymous attendee. If we put labour and player contracts next to each other, would something like a non-compete clause be possible for clubs to get some negotiating power back?
No, I don't think so, because these non-compete clauses, are also governed by employment legislation. And you see in many jurisdictions already that one is looking very critically towards the extent and scope of an geographical, but also in terms of different kind of qualifications and positions that you can carry out. There's a limitation in the amount of impediments for the worker to move. So if you would put a non-compete clause in a professional football contract saying you're not allowed to work at another professional football club for 1 or 2 years, well, I would really love to take on that case.
You're winning that one. You're winning that one.
You're winning that one.
Yeah. But what about this sort of thing? And I'm slightly changing it. And it's coaches and sporting directors, like the sort of gardening leave clauses and the sort of you can't come back to our club to take players and all that sort of thing. Is that relevant to this as well, do you think, or not?
Sorry, I didn't really get what you.
So like we've got a situation with coaches and with sporting directors leaving clubs. There's a gardening leave clause in the contract where they've got to spend 6 months out of the game and they're not allowed to go back to the club for certain players. Is that sort of thing, covered by this? Is that going to be hard to, because you're stopping them earning a living, aren't you?
It's basically the same thing. It's a non-compete and a no poach. And as Roberto said, there are strict limitations with regard to these kind of clauses, because as you say, they prevent a person from performing its profession. The law is hard on these kind of clauses, and really depends on which jurisdiction. In some jurisdictions, there might be some more leeway than in others. And again, this is the difficulty of this whole situation, that you have to apply a lot of laws alongside each other.
So let's talk about one law. There's a question here from T to you, Robby. How does the law of 78 work?
What is the law of 78, by the way?
Yeah.
Well, the law of 78 is, I think it's a 2-pager, wherein there is a very important provision that says that when you terminate as a club or as a player an ongoing contract, then you have to pay the residual value only, which is peanuts when you look at what is going on at the transfer market. And it also says that when you terminate early in that given season, you cannot compete anymore for another club. So that's inside the law. But of course, if you would terminate at the end of the season, there is no sanction, basically. So that is the law of 78. And it has, to my knowledge, never been applied, because there is kind of like a silent agreement between clubs not to apply it. And the clubs, they use the transfer market logic instead of this law. But now that this transfer market has got a blow, everybody is looking at the law again. And there might be a first case. And it's really very much in favor of players, this law, because it's very cheap to end the contract.
Yeah. But surely the clubs are getting together and sort of thinking, we need to be talking to FIFA about how we can protect our assets and protect our business models and protect the value of the players that we've currently got. So that consultation will be going on, I'm sure, behind closed doors with all of the clubs in Europe, because, like you said at the beginning in your overview, Robbie, that a lot of clubs depend on the business model of making money from transfers, and that might have an effect on players lower down if clubs haven't got the revenue that we're used to, wages and everything else. So it's a real shock to the whole of the system. But surely the clubs are talking to FIFA and trying to sort of balance the books, if you like.
Yeah, behind the scenes, there are a lot of talks going on, but the question is who is talking to who, and does it make sense that they are talking, and what comes out? Because it makes no sense to just talk to each other. You need to have real consultation. You need to be really at the table, and well, all noses should be in the same direction, because, as you said, the whole ecosystem is affected. So clubs need to be there, leagues need to be there, players need to be there. And FIFA, again, should only be a notary public to record the solution that they come up with.
Yeah.
Because
and
they
agents as
have
well.
no skin in the game here.
Don't forget agents.
And agents as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, of course.
No,
And this is also important. Sorry to interrupt. This is also important from the verdict. It has a paragraph 99 that is already often referred to. And in that paragraph 99, the court says, look, FIFA, you claim here to protect players, but we have checked your statutes. It says nothing about players. It says nothing. So your whole argument is flawed. It's not in your statutes. It's not your goal to protect the players. That's the first thing that's inside. The second thing is, look, this is a labor relation between employers and employees. You have no mandate to regulate such a public affair. So you can infer from that who has the mandate are the employers and the employees. And they could enter into collective bargaining agreements. This is easier said than done, but this would be a robust solution.
How
Roberto, did you just want to come back on that, onto Robbie's point, Roberto?
No, what I wanted to say is that I really appreciate that you mentioned that agents should be a part of it. Don't worry. No,
you're onto it. You're on it.
No, the thing is that you have to be realistic. The same goes for FIFA as goes for agent, just like Robby mentioned. Obviously, I think the agent should have a consultative voice in such a discussion, explaining their experiences in negotiating contracts, but the agents cannot be a party signing off a collective bargaining agreement when it deals with transfer issues. They're not employers, they're not workers, they're intermediaries in that sense, in the football world. If you speak about creating a football agent regulation via the social dialogue, okay, then I would say they would be able maybe to get an exception and get a seat on the table to have a proper consultation discussion, but they will not be the signatory party. They're not an employers organization. So I fully support what Robby is saying in the sense of every stakeholder should realize what he's doing. This is not about the good of the game, primarily. This is first about being a worker. It is a development of how professional football developed itself over the years. First there was no money, everyone was an amateur. Then money came in. Then we wanted to keep players for more than one season, so we created a system of blocking someone to move to another club without the permission of the previous club, registration as an association. It is quite logical if you follow everything, to be honest.
That's a nice segue into the next question that we've got here, again from an anonymous attendee. To you, Roberto, do you believe that FIFA's intention in revising Article 17 of the RSTP is genuine? And two, will EFAA be submitting a proposal as part of this consultation?
Well, we have some statement, I believe statement that we want to make, but we're a bit reluctant with coming up with proposals because then they tend to take something out that we're not 100% okay with. But I understand that structure, and I'm not here to bash FIFA. The only thing that I want to say is every individual stakeholder and governing body has a specific task within the autonomy that's given. Do I believe that the intention of FIFA is genuine in order to get everyone's opinion in and come up with a different perspective on Article 17. I think they want now. Someone else asked me the other day, FIFA is afraid because they will lose money. And Robby, I don't know how you think about it, but I don't see FIFA directly making money on the transfer system, because this is a fluctuation of income via the clubs, where it could be an interest of FIFA if the biggest clubs, have the most influence on a national level in their associations, and that it might be something that has to do with getting votes in, because that's an element of power, obviously, within FIFA. It's also not bashing FIFA, it's what it is, that any organization would function like that. So maybe that would be the intention of FIFA if the national associations have a preference for a lot of money staying at clubs and not going out of football via agents' fees and employment contracts, then I understand that the interest of FIFA will be more targeted towards those big clubs. And we know there's a lot of interconnection between organizations like ECA, EPFL, and the other stakeholders, because they all have a specific seat. So if that will be an interest of FIFA, then they don't want to have a genuine input on the change of Article 17. But if FIFA is really there for the good of the game and understands that they should step aside a little bit when it comes to purely labor law, labor issues, then they also open the door for other organizations to truly have an impact on their regulations.
Mm. Very, very interesting. Robby, back to you. Do you see, for us here in the UK, what would be the mechanics of an agent or a player looking at what's going on in the EU and thinking, I might try and bring this to reality here in the UK? What likelihood would you see of that happening, or is it going to be a case of wait and see?
Likelihood, really, I don't know. Don't have a crystal ball. But as Tony said, you can shop cheap and you can perhaps still sell not cheap because you're not bound by EU law anymore. Actually, so Brexit was a good thing from that perspective, as you said, Ryan. And I was in the beginning of the week, I was in Croatia explaining this to Croatian folks, and they said, while they were laughing, and we just joined the European Union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tony, what feeling have you had out of either fellow agents, players, clubs on this? I think from the vibe that I've had, everybody's kind of looking on with a bit of horror, a bit of concern, but then actually thinking, well, hang on, a bit like Robby said, actually, this could actually be good for us.
No, I'm honestly, I'm shocked by what I've heard today. I didn't expect it to be as catastrophic for the transfer market as it sounds, as it potentially sounds. I know we've got to wait and see for the first transfer, but money's so, the football business is so money orientated. If a player can be got out of a club for 2 million as opposed to 40 million, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? It's an absolute no-brainer. And I really like Roberto's point about having, if there has to be buyout clauses, but having the agent acting in together with the player and the club. So working together on a player's career and being open with the club and being open with the player about potential future transfers. Because let's face it, unless you're at the very top of Real Madrid and Newcastle United, all the players want to move up. All the players want to earn good money. They want to play at the highest level. Probably the playing at the highest level is before earning good money. The money follows anyway. But if your agent can do that and you can move from a club in France cheaply to the Premier League, then salaries are going to go up because the Premier League clubs are not paying 40 million up front or amortized over 5 years. So if it's just purely we're getting into this, the courts will be full of players and their agents and advisors queuing up to sort of say, right, he wants to go to Liverpool for 2 million. Let's make it so in this court. Let's make it so in that court. is that what we're facing? You know, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm surprised of what I've heard today about how big an impact it's going to have. But you know, I'm dealing in real terms. We've got the January window around here. There's some of the clubs are going to be, I don't know, are they going to try and benefit from it? I would expect so.
A really interesting question here. I'm going to put it to Roberto and Robby. Tim asks, how might the ruling affect non-EU clubs playing in EU leagues like Monaco, FC Andorra, and Derry City?
Wow, that is a left
It's a
field
good question.
It's a great question. It's a bit of a left field one. So you've got 3 clubs that are non-EU playing in
EU leagues. Do you want to try and tackle that one, Roberto?
Have Vatican City got a club? Have Vatican City got a club, Ryan?
Yeah, give it to Roberto first, this one.
Give you some thinking time, Robby. You need some thinking time on this one. It's a hell of a question.
I think EU law will be triggered if it moves to an EU territory. It is also connected also to the nationality of the player there. So I think that the scope of trying to find a little wormhole through this is quite difficult, to be honest.
Unless you would have a transfer from Andorra to Derry.
It's well possible. Yeah, I've been to Derry actually. It's I think they've got into Europe again, Ryan, haven't they, Derry?
Londonderry, as I like to refer to it as,
right,
but it's no, you're right. They have, and they've done absolutely fantastic. But again, unintended consequences. You know, we're talking about it all of the time. There was another question that I've just kind of hung on to a little bit. And Roberto, I want to ask you: have you had any feelings from some of the other big leagues around the world? I'm going to throw the Saudis in there as well, but Saudi, China, Southeast Asia, America. Any reaction from those territories to this ruling?
I think they're not yet aware of the scope of this ruling, to be honest. But I know that there are at least, well, the first wave that I'm experiencing is okay, we need to negotiate the extension of the contract. What's going to happen next? So I think now the realization with clubs is starting. At least in the Netherlands, I can tell you that some clubs are now, after the first meeting, coming back and saying, "Oh, I think we do need to include a buyout clause." Okay, now I think so that's what the change that I see happening. So that's the first thing. So I think after that, if clubs turn out to really make a loss because of them including, at least in their minds, the income of these transfer fees into their budgets, then it really starts to become a bit painful, to be honest with them.
Robby, would you concur with that in terms of a sort of wider view around the world?
Yeah, actually, I've not really something to add to what Roberto said. Yeah.
I'm thinking, Ryan, you know, we've got a football transfer. I'm plugging the football transfer forum here, so, but bear with me. I didn't realize the actual scale of the potential scale of what's happening. And I think, you know, everybody should be aware of that. And I think we've got an event coming up on the 27th of November. And I think we need this on the agenda for that event as well. We've got 40, 50 clubs turning up to that event. And I think if we'd have had, you know, 40, 50 clubs on this webinar, I think they'd been going back to the clubs and saying, hang on a second, these are potential, potential threats, potential opportunities in the transfer market, and this might, you know, just to be aware of it. And I think from my point of view as an agent, you to understand what potentially could happen and to have more potential leverage in a negotiation. And I think Diarra does give you that as an agent. I think, you know, there's the potential for leverage. I don't know whether you agree with me, Roberto, but you know, you've got a ruling there that supports a player's position. Do you think I'm right in saying that?
Yeah, I think you are. I think that the clubs will really fear this development in the end, if as long as they're not fully aware of it yet. And I think that they should act upon it. I think there should really be a realization that something is changing. What clubs could do at that negotiation table is saying, okay, um, we well, I don't think that they can get away with not including a buyout clause anymore. That's for
Right.
starters. Sometimes clubs will say, okay, we already do that, and your salary reflects the necessity for us to reflects your acceptation to that. I think there was also a question, would it be feasible not to have a buyout clause? Maybe I could provide a little bit of views on that. If a club would no, I think it's changed for clubs. They need to act. They need to, well, not to act in the sense that they could, because a talk with FIFA is useless for the
Yeah.
club.
Yeah.
So they should really look at other stakeholders as well. I think FIFA did not fully realize the extent of the case, maybe too, but still, they would need to speak to players at least.
So fundamentally, the agent has got in every contract has got to discuss a buyout clause, and the level of that though, Robbie, because if he can potentially get out for 2 million, the buyout clause, he might be let's say he's getting £1 million a year gross, and he's got a 3-year contract, but he can get out for 1 million potentially. How, what, and the player could have, if he's a Premier League player, his value could be 40, 50 million. How, how is that going to sit? You've got two ends of the negotiation. I've sort of, the bottom line is a couple of mil, the top line is 40 million. Where's it going to be? What's going to be the number?
As I said, that's the magic formula. So that's difficult, and it also relates to the domestic clause being being mandatory or not. The relationship between your contractual freedom and the law. Can you deviate from what the law says as regards severance pays? I would argue from a business logic, I would argue yes, why not? But it has to be again proportionate, and determining what is proportionate is really the key question here.
Yeah. And the other question that I've got is, how are we going to value players going forward in light of Diarra, Roberto? Can you? I think FIFA were talking about at one point a sort of algorithm to value players. That algorithm needs the Diarra case inserting into it somehow. But what's your thoughts on the valuation of players now?
No, I think that there should be well, that's also what an EFA statement would be, in terms of what that you need to have objective criteria. In the Netherlands and on Belgium, you also have these, like Robby mentioned, the law of 78. In the Netherlands, if there's an unjust termination without termination of a contract with fixed term without just cause, then the residual value of the contract basically is the maximum amount that you could earn. We've opened up our national labor legislation for professional football. So basically, we have a sort of a football act within our employment act, and it states that for certain professions, but it's solely focused on football as presenters of the television as well, but that's almost not used. So it's solely focused on football, stating that there's an exception for people in certain sectors of the industry where there's an intrinsic necessity to maintain a different approach. So basically, we use that also at the arbitration courts of the KNVB to implement Article 17, basically, of FIFA. So basically, what we have in the Netherlands is we can make a worker or a football player pay more than his residual value of the contract. So that still remains. But first, the judge or the arbitration committee would look at the FIFA use, how does FIFA in general gets along with these calculation of these amounts, and then they will have this positive interest, so it could be quite a big amount. But nowadays they would have to focus more on general working laws and focus primarily on the residual value of the contract. So that's where I believe that you could be very critical about it, that it will be implemented. I saw a question of Vitus, if I may answer to that, because I'm also conscious of the time a little bit.
Yeah.
What was the actual question?
It was why should a player accept a buyout clause if he can leave for almost free anyway?
If he would, that's the whole essential point. He has the freedom not to accept a buyout clause. The club might be a bit pissed off, but I think they're too stupid to just let him, if he's a good enough player, not to field him, because you always have to be a bit careful in those employers relationship. So if he doesn't want an employment clause, leave for free, he can include that. But if the club would say, hey, listen, we know we received some training compensation if you leave, but we surely want to make a bit more because it's part of a business model to develop players, and so on and so on. It needs to go via your cashier, because basically you say, okay, if you want to make money on me and my development, yeah, we will offer you 5%. Oh, 5% of what? Yeah, from the buyout clause. Well, I could agree, but if I don't, I leave for free. So why don't you offer me 25%?
Yeah. And I mean, free agent players can do that anyway and ask for a percentage of a future transfer fee. And I think it's right to do that if you can negotiate with the club. And at the end of the day, if the club doesn't want to do that, they walk away, or the player goes and signs for somebody else who will do that. So I think if all of the clubs are looking to put in buyout clauses, it's going to be very difficult for a particular player to shop around for the best or the free, where there's no buyout clause contract. If the clubs get together and say, look, we've got to really nail down these buyout clauses, and we've got to have they operate as a cartel anyway, so there's 20 clubs there. They'll decide amongst themselves, buyout clause is the way forward, guys. Let's make sure we're all getting on the same thing, and then we've got a bit of uniformity in the league. Does that make any sense?
I'm not sure all 20 would get together, maybe 6.
I'm 20 in England. I'm thinking the Premier League, of course.
Okay, as Roberto alluded to, we are coming to the end now. So I'm going to ask Robby and Roberto for some final remarks, and I'll ask a question in there as well. So some final remarks, guys, and also an answer, yes or no, to whether or not you think we will see a player bring a case in the next 6 months. Robby, I'll go to you first.
Yes is the answer to your question.
I love somebody who gives a straight answer to a straight question.
This is yeah.
He's not a politician. He's not a politician.
We're not used for those straight answers out of Belgium in this country, Robby. So we enjoyed that.
Not a typical Belgian.
All right. Have you got any other final remarks that you'd like to make?
Yeah, just again reiterate that the verdict has very disruptive effects on the football ecosystem. So there should be a sense of urgency to come up with solutions. And it's very good of you to organize this webinar to also kickstart this thinking. And the deadline is very soon. What I expect that will happen is that, and I'm not a big fan of it, but what I expect is that FIFA will, at a certain point in time, launch a quick fix of the RSTP, which will fix not a lot, but it will be like a patch on a much bigger wound to buy some time. Again, I have no crystal ball, but I think we need a fundamental solution. And as I said before, we need, going forward on a much more general level, co-decision making instead of this top-down model. And this is also for UEFA.
Thank you, Robby. Roberto, some final thoughts from yourself. I guess putting on your EFA cap as well in terms of what's next on this from EFA as well.
That's dangerous to speak about EFA and caps in the same sentence.
Nice one. I was going to mention the FAR document if we've got time, but
no. It's for another day. Now, what we believe in EFA, well, we have. I don't know if it goes too far to read it out loud, but we have a statement that we wanted to post also after this talk. So we believe that the ruling highlighted the challenge of balancing the unique nature of employment in football with a need to adhere to legal standards focusing on the protection of workers. So that's where we are. Employment in football is distinct from other sectors and requires tailored solution to maintain adequate employment protection for players while ensuring stability and competitiveness within the broader scope of football. So if you look at domestic football regulations, they do not sufficiently govern the distinct nature of player employment, and the current international regulation for transfer of players fail to fully align with the fundamental Freudian almost, principle of the free movement of workers. So to address the issue, we propose basically a twofold solution, and it addresses what we discussed here. First, the standard negotiation of buyout clauses to reflect the interests and rights of players, and the introduction of a strict, predetermined, objective criteria for calculation of damages that, as a consequence, for players who unilaterally terminate a contract without just cause. So basically, then we have a bit more focusing on that. So if there will be a possibility to come up with an evidence-based policy as a fundament for why objective criteria are correct to determine the amount of a value of a player, then that could be implemented. I'm not econometrist, I'm not very much into that area, but I can imagine that if a player has proven to sell 500,000 on shirt sales or whatever, he could be included as well. So I'm quite sure we have algorithms to find that out.
Fantastic. I really appreciate that. Tony, I'll leave it to you to thank Roberto and Robby for their help in putting this together today and of their obvious quality participation in it. But I'll just say thank you for everybody for tuning in this afternoon as well. Tony, I know that you'll make people aware of kind of what's next or where they can get a recording of this as well. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, and thanks to Tees and Kiva at EFAA as well. They've done a great job in bringing this webinar to be. I've really learned a hell of a lot today. In fact, I've been shocked. I didn't realise the impact. So I'm grateful to both Robby and Roberto. I think I'm relishing the fact that I think FIFA are on the run in the courts, and we've got the FAA document coming up and other things happening. But for me, they've got to listen. They've got to listen and consult properly, and let's see where that takes us going forward. And just all the football agents and lawyers, good luck in the January transfer window, and hopefully see you soon.
I think the final takeaway is that Brexit was a huge success for the UK.
Yeah, well, that's another thing, Ryan, because in the UK is a very interesting element of the FIFA football agent regulations. The case there, it feels like a huge success, but there's still this impediment for dual representation. Yeah. If dual representation now becomes more and more important, I think you shot yourself in the foot there. But that's for a different topic, isn't it? Yeah.
Next time. Guys, have a fantastic weekend. I hope everybody's getting to games. I hope everybody's going to enjoy the beautiful game, and we will catch you all next time. Roberto, Robby, thank you again. Absolutely top draw. Brilliant.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Love that. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.